The wind on Crowthorne Fell had teeth in it, even in late summer. Aloan Hale knew those teeth well. She had been raised on the high ground where the sky pressed down like a slate roof, and the grass grew thin and sweet. Her father, Tam Hale, had been a drover for 30 years before his knees gave out, and he had taught her to read a horse's mind before she could read words. So when the steward of Crowthorne Hall sent a boy running up the fellside with a message, Aloan was not surprised. She only tightened her shawl and followed the boy down through the bracken. The stallion waited in the stable yard, packing in circles, his coat like wet copper. He was an Arabian, all fire and fine bone, meant for the saddle of a duke, not the rough stone walls of Westmoreland. He came by coach from London, the steward said, and by boat before that. Lord Ambrose sent word he would arrive at dusk. The beast spooked at a drover's dog and tore the groom's arm clean open. He's been gone 2 hours. Aloan stepped close to the stallion's pen. He stopped packing, ears flat, nostrils wide. She made no move toward him. She only stood there, breathing slow, letting the wind carry her scent, peat smoke, wool, and the faint green of wild mint she had gathered that morning. "Bring me a halter," she said. The steward blinked. "You'll not catch him with a halter. He's gone up onto Gable Crag. The ground's all loose scree and hidden drop." "The halter is for the mare I'll ride," Aloan said. She rode out alone on a sturdy fell pony named Bracken, a small gray mare with a coat like river mist. The wind tore at her hair as they climbed. The sky was turning the color of hammered pewter. She found the Arabian high on a saddle of grass between 2 peaks, his flanks dark with sweat, his head up. With him ran a dozen wild fell ponies, stocky, shaggy, black and bay, moving as one body around him, circling, testing. The Arabian was not running from them. He was learning to be one of them. Aloan sat her pony and watched. The stallion saw her. He wheeled and the wild herd wheeled with him. For a long moment no one moved. Then Aloan clicked her tongue, a sound as soft as a mouse in dry leaves. The stallion's ears twitched. She clicked again, and this time she turned Bracken slightly away, not toward him, giving him the choice. The stallion took a step, then another. The wild ponies milled behind him, uncertain. Aloan did not look at him directly. She looked at the ground, at the sky, at her own hands on the reins. When he was close enough that she could smell the salt of his sweat, she reached out and laid her hand flat against his neck. He quivered. She whispered something in the old tongue her mother had taught her, a fragment of a lullaby for colts. The stallion lowered his head. She walked him down off the fell with no rope, no halter, only her voice and the quiet rhythm of Bracken's hooves behind them. The wild ponies followed for a mile, then peeled away one by one into the mist. At the edge of the stable yard she saw the carriage. A great black thing, mud-spattered, with 4 sweating horses and a driver in green livery. And standing beside it, tall and sharp-edged as a blade, was the Duke of Crowthorne. Ambrose Crowthorne was not a man who arrived quietly. He wore a riding coat of dark blue superfine, and his boots gleamed despite the mud of the road. His jaw was clean-shaven, his mouth a hard line. He watched Aloan lead his prize mare into the yard as if she had just insulted his entire lineage. "I sent for my stable master," he said, "not a girl." The steward stammered, but Aloan spoke first. "Your stable master is in Kendal fetching a physician for the groom your horse mauled. I was here." The Duke's gaze traveled over her. She wore a patched wool skirt and a man's old coat. Her hair had come loose from its braid and hung in wind-tangled ropes. She was dirty, tired, and cold. "And who are you to touch an animal worth more than your father's yearly earnings?" Aloan held his stare. "I am the drover's daughter, and your horse followed me home because I had the sense not to chase him." The stallion, still trembling from the climb, pressed his head against her shoulder. The Duke saw it. His eyes narrowed. "Bring him inside," he said, as if she were a servant, "and do not think to touch him again without my leave." He turned and walked toward the hall, his boots loud on the gravel. But at the door he paused. He looked back over his shoulder. Eloin had not moved. She stood beside the stallion, one hand on his neck, watching the Duke with eyes as clear and unimpressed as the fell water. The Duke's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being looked at like that, as though he were the one who did not belong. He went inside, and the door closed with a heavy sound. Eloin turned to the steward. "He'll need warm bran mash and clean straw, not the damp stuff in that corner." The steward stared at her. "You just defied a duke." "He is a man who has never been out in a storm with a frightened horse," Eloin said. "He will learn, or he will lose the animal." She walked the stallion into the stable block, and the wind followed her, rattling the doors like a warning. Part 2. By morning, the entire household knew the drover's daughter had brought the Duke's prize mare down from Gable Crag. The servants spoke of it in whispers. The grooms watched Eloin with a new respect, though they were careful not to show it too openly. The Duke sent for her at noon. She found him in the library, a room so large it could have swallowed her father's cottage 3 times over. Shelves of leather-bound books lined the walls, and a fire burned in a grate the size of a carriage door. The Duke sat behind a desk of dark oak, papers spread before him. He did not look up when she entered. "You will remain at the hall until the mare is settled," he said. "The steward will find you quarters. You will report to me each evening." Eloin stood still. "And if I have duties at home?" "Your father can manage without you for a fortnight." He turned a page. "Unless he is as incapable as his daughter is impertinent." Eloin felt the bar, but she did not flinch. "My father taught me to value a horse's trust over a man's title. I have never found his judgment lacking." The Duke looked up then. His eyes were gray, the color of rain on stone. "And yet you stand in my house, covered in mud, answering to me." "I stand here because you asked me to stay," she said, "not because I am yours to command." A muscle in his jaw flexed. "The mare was to be a gift for my betrothed. Lady Marguerite arrives tomorrow. I will not have the animal ruined by rough handling. You will stay, and you will be civil." The name hung in the air. Lady Marguerite Vane, the Tun's most celebrated beauty, daughter of the Earl of Sedgwick. Eloin had heard the name, the way one hears of a coming storm. She inclined her head. "I will stay until the mare is sound, but I will not be civil for the sake of your pride." She left the library before he could answer. Lady Marguerite Vane arrived the next day in a flurry of silk and French perfume. She was everything a duchess should be, fair-haired, porcelain-skinned, with a smile that could charm a bishop and a voice like honeyed wine. But her eyes were sharp as glass. She noticed Eloin immediately. "That is the creature who brought back your horse," she said to the Duke as they stood on the steps. "How rustic." The Duke's mouth twitched. "She knows horses. And she dresses like a man. I hope she does not intend to dine with us." Eloin, passing with an armload of clean bandages, heard the words clearly. She did not break stride. She had been told 100 times that her clothes were not proper for a woman, that her hands were rough, that her voice carried too much of the fell wind. She had learned that silence was a wall that no amount of silk could climb. But at dinner the Duke summoned her. She came to the dining room in the same clothes she had worn all day because she had nothing else. The footman stared. Lady Marguerite's lips curled into a tiny smile. Sir Hugh Bedlington, a neighboring baronet with a florid face and a fondness for port, raised his glass in a mocking toast. "The horse tamer," he said. "Will you dance for us after the pudding?" The Duke set down his fork. "Miss Hale will answer a question of horseflesh," he said. "I have wagered with Sir Hugh that the Arabian will take to a curb bit within a fortnight. Miss Hale will tell us if I am right." The table went still. It was a trap, everyone knew it. A curb bit was harsh, a tool for a heavy hand. The Arabian's mouth was still tender from flight and fear. Eloin looked at the Duke. "A fortnight with a curb would ruin that horse's mouth," she said. He would learn to fight the bit, not yield to it. You would gain control and lose his trust. Sir Hugh laughed. A stable girl lectures a duke on horsemanship. Delightful. I am a drover's daughter, Eloin said, her voice even. I have brought horses across the Haugils in winter. I know when a bit will make a horse hate the hand that holds it. The duke's eyes flickered with something, not anger but something keener. And what would you use instead? A simple snaffle, padded leather, and 3 weeks of groundwork before you ever put a saddle on his back again. 3 weeks. The Duke of Crowthorne has no 3 weeks to spare for a horse's feelings. Then you should not have bought an Arabian, Eloin said. A silence fell deeper than the grave. Lady Marguerite's smile had vanished. Sir Hugh was staring at his plate. The footmen had stopped moving. The Duke stood slowly. He walked around the table until he stood before Eloin. She was tall for a woman, but he towered over her. You think I bought the wrong horse, he said. I think you bought a horse you did not understand, she said, and he will be the one to pay for your pride. The Duke held her gaze for a long, unsteady moment. Then he turned and walked back to his seat. You may go, he said. Eloin curtsied, a small, deliberate dip, more an acknowledgment than a deference, and walked out. The doors closed behind her, but not before she heard Lady Marguerite's voice, sharp and thin as a blade. She will be gone by morning, the lady said, or I will. The Duke did not reply. That night Eloin sat in the stable loft, her back against a bale of straw, the Arabian dozing below. She heard footsteps on the ladder. It was the Duke, still in his evening coat, a lantern in his hand. He did not speak for a long while. Then he said, You were right about the bit. The light from the lantern flickered across his face, gilding the hard lines of his jaw. He looked, for a moment, like a man who had been walking in darkness a long time and had just heard a voice he did not want to answer. But you were wrong about one thing, he said. I do not keep horses I cannot master. He looked at the Arabian, then at Eloin. And I do not keep people I cannot understand. He left the lantern on the floor and climbed down into the dark. Eloin watched the light until it vanished. Part 3. The Duke began to seek her out. Not openly. He was too proud for that, but in small, unavoidable ways. He would appear at the stable door at dawn, pretending to inspect the horses. He would stand at the edge of the training ring, his hands clasped behind his back, watching Eloin work the Arabian in slow circles. He asked no questions, but he did not leave. One morning, after a night of rain that had turned the yard to mud, he found her cleaning the stallion's hooves. The horse stood quietly, one leg raised, his head turned to watch her with something close to trust. He has changed, the Duke said. He has learned he is safe here, Eloin said. She set the hoof down and straightened. A horse does not care about title or fortune. He cares about the consistency of your hands and the truth of your voice. The Duke leaned against the stall door. And what truth do you hear in my voice? Eloin met his gaze. You are a man who speaks in commands. It is hard to hear much else. His jaw tightened, but he did not argue. Lady Marguerite wishes to ride the mare in the park. She says she is tired of waiting. The mare is not ready for the park. She is not ready for a side saddle, and she is not ready for Lady Marguerite. You dislike her. I do not know her, Eloin said. I know horses, and that horse is not ready. The Duke studied her for a long moment. Then teach me, he said quietly. Teach me what the horse knows. For the next 10 days they met at dawn. Eloin showed him how to stand in a horse's blind spot without alarming it, how to read the flick of an ear, the shifting weight of a hind leg, how to speak with his body, not his voice. The Duke was a quick learner, but he was also impatient. He wanted mastery, and the horse refused to give it. Eloin watched him struggle, saw the anger rise in him, and saw him swallow it. It is not weakness to ask for trust instead of obedience, she said one morning, as the stallion shied from his touch. I have never asked for trust in my life, he said. I know, she said. That is why he does not give it to you. The Duke said nothing, but he did not leave. Lady Marguerite was not blind. She saw the Duke's distraction, the way his eyes drifted toward the stables during dinner, the way he rose earlier each morning. She was a woman of society, bred to win, and she did not intend to lose. She began with whispers. It was Sir Hugh Bedlington who first repeated the rumor to Aloin's face. They say you have been helping yourself to the Duke's silver, he said, smirking. A drover's daughter would not know the value of such things. Aloin looked at him coolly. And a baronet would not know the value of a good horse. We all have our limitations. Sir Hugh flushed. You will not be so smug when the magistrate comes. But the magistrate did not come. Instead, the rumor spread through the local assemblies and drawing rooms, gaining weight with each retelling. Servants began to watch Aloin when she passed. The grooms whispered behind their hands. At the weekly assembly in Kendal, she felt the stares like needles. She wore her best dress, a dark green wool, clean and serviceable but far from fashionable. She stood alone by the punch table, watching the dancers, and she did not lower her eyes. Sir Hugh approached her with a glass of punch and a false smile. Miss Hale, he said loudly enough for those nearby to hear, I am surprised to see you here. I thought you would be at the hall, counting the silver. The laughter that followed was not loud, but it was cruel. Aloin felt the heat of it on her skin, but she would not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. If I were counting the silver, she said, I would know it is plate, not silver. The Duke would never waste true silver on guests who only pretend to be his friends. The laughter stopped. Sir Hugh's smile curdled. You have a sharp tongue for a servant. I am not a servant. I am a drover's daughter. I have walked 100 miles behind a herd of cattle. I have slept in the rain with only a horse's warmth to keep me alive. What have you done, Sir Hugh, besides inherit a title and drink another man's port? The room had gone very quiet. Sir Hugh's face was mottled, his hands shaking. He opened his mouth to speak, but a voice cut through the air. Miss Hale is my guest. The Duke stepped out of the crowd. He was dressed in black, his face unreadable. He walked to Aloin's side and turned to face Sir Hugh. She is also the only person in this room who understands the horse I prize above all others, the Duke said. You will apologize, or you will leave. Sir Hugh's mouth opened and closed. I meant no offense. You meant a great deal of offense, the Duke said, but you will not mean it again. Sir Hugh bowed stiffly and retreated into the crowd. The Duke turned to Aloin. His expression was strange, angry, but not at her. You should have told me, he said. Would it have changed anything? It would have changed everything. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then offered his arm. Dance with me. It was not a question, but it was not a command either. It was something in between, a bridge held out across a chasm. Aloin looked at his arm, then at his face. She did not take his arm, but she did not refuse. She walked with him to the center of the room, and the crowd parted like water around a stone. They danced. The music was a waltz, and his hand was warm on her waist. She could feel the eyes of the room on them, but she did not care. She was not dancing to spite them. She was dancing because she wanted to, and because for the first time in her life she felt the weight of a man's respect in the way he held her. When the dance ended, he did not let go of her hand. I will find out who spread the rumor, he said quietly, and when I do, they will answer to me. He released her, and she stepped back, her heart beating harder than it should have. You owe me nothing, she said. I owe you a great deal, he said, and I have never been good at paying my debts. He walked away, leaving her standing at the edge of the dance floor, the eyes of the ton upon her. Part 4. The assembly was still buzzing when the doors burst open. A footman in Crowthorne livery staggered in, his face white, his coat torn. He carried something in his hands, a silver snuff-box engraved with the Duke's crest. "My lord," he gasped, "I found this, in the saddlebag of the drover's daughter's pony." The room erupted. Whispers, gasps, the rustle of silk and scandal. Sir Hugh Bedlington stepped forward, his face alight with triumph. "I told you," he said loudly. "A drover's brat with sticky fingers. She is no guest, she is a thief." Alowen stood frozen. The snuff-box was real. She had seen it on the Duke's desk. She had never touched it. The Duke stepped into the center of the room. His face was calm, too calm, like water before a breaking storm. He took the snuff-box from the footman and turned it over in his hands. "Where did you say you found this?" he asked. "In the saddlebag, my lord, as I was preparing the mare for tomorrow." "And who told you to search her saddlebag?" The footman hesitated. His eyes darted toward Lady Marguerite, who stood at the edge of the crowd, her face pale and perfectly composed. I thought it proper, my lord." "You thought it proper." The Duke's voice was soft, but it carried through the room like a blade drawn from a sheath. He turned the snuff-box over again. Then he looked at Sir Hugh. "This snuff-box was a gift from Lady Marguerite," he said. "She gave it to me on the night we announced our engagement. I kept it in my study. Miss Hale has never set foot in my study." Sir Hugh's face went slack. "But the footman found it in her saddlebag." "Yes," the Duke said, "he did, which means someone put it there." He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping the room until it settled on Lady Marguerite. Someone who wished to see Miss Hale ruined. Lady Marguerite's composure cracked. "Ambrose, you cannot think I would never touch such a creature's things. The smell of the stables alone would make me faint." "And yet you knew exactly which saddlebag belonged to her," the Duke said. "You knew which pony was hers. You knew when she would be away from the stable." "Everyone knows that," Marguerite said, her voice rising. "The servants talk. Sir Hugh told me." The Duke looked at Sir Hugh. "Is that true?" Sir Hugh's face had gone the color of old milk. He looked at Marguerite, then at the Duke, then at the floor. I may have mentioned it." "You may have mentioned it." The Duke's voice was flat, deadly. "And did you also mention that you have been spreading rumors about Miss Hale for weeks, that you have been poisoning every drawing room in the county against her?" Sir Hugh said nothing. The Duke turned back to Marguerite. "I have been patient. I have been blind. I have told myself that you were a woman of the ton, and that the ways of the ton were not mine to judge. But this is not the way of the ton. This is the way of a coward and a liar." Marguerite's face went white. "How dare you speak to me like that? I am your betrothed." "You are nothing to me," the Duke said. "The engagement is at an end. I will have your father's consent by messenger tonight. You will leave Crowthorne Hall by morning." He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. The finality of his words hit the room like a physical blow. Marguerite stared at him, her lips trembling. Then she turned and fled, her skirts billowing behind her. Sir Hugh took a step after her, then stopped. The Duke turned to Alowen. She had not moved. She stood exactly where she had been, her hands clasped in front of her, her chin high. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry. "Miss Hale," the Duke said, "I apologize that you were subjected to this. It was beneath you, and it was beneath the dignity of my household." Alowen looked at him. The room was watching, waiting for her to thank him, to curtsy, to be grateful for his rescue. "Instead," she said, "you did not defend me because you believed me innocent. You defended me because you could not bear the insult to your own honor." The Duke's jaw tightened. "That is not true." "Is it not?" She took a step toward him, and for the first time he seemed to waver. "When I stood accused, your first thought was not of me. It was of your own humiliation. You would have let the room believe me a thief if the truth had not implicated your own betrothed. And now you stand there, expecting my gratitude for saving me from a fire you allowed to burn." The Duke's face was a mask, but beneath the mask something was cracking. "Alowen." "Do not use my name as though we are equals," she said. "I am the drover's daughter. You are the Duke of Crowthorne. I will never forget that again." She turned and walked out of the room, her back straight, her steps even. The crowd parted for her in silence. No one laughed. No one whispered. They only watched her go, and the heavy oak doors closed behind her with a sound like the end of something. The Duke stood alone in the center of the room. He looked at the snuff box in his hand, then at the door through which she had vanished. For a long moment he did not move. Then he crossed the room, flung open the doors, and went out into the night after her. Part 5. The moon was high over Crowthorne Fell, silvering the grass and turning the stone walls into long shadows. Elowen walked fast, her boots crunching on the gravel of the drive, then softer on the turf of the fell path. The wind was cold and clean, and it burned her lungs. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears were a luxury she could not afford. She heard his footsteps behind her, but she did not turn. "Elowen." She kept walking. "Miss Hale, please." The word please stopped her. She had never heard him say it before. She stood still, her back to him, the wind pulling at her hair. "I was wrong," he said. His voice was raw, stripped of its polish. "You were right. I defended you because I could not bear to be made a fool. I have spent my whole life building walls, and when those walls were threatened, I did not think of you. I thought only of myself." Elowen turned slowly. He stood a few paces away, his coat open, his cravat loosened. In the moonlight he looked younger and far less sure of himself. "You are a duke," she said. "You have never had to think of anyone but yourself." "That is not true." He took a step toward her. "I have thought of you, every morning, every evening. Every time I close my eyes, I see you standing in that stable yard with my horse pressed against your shoulder, looking at me as though I were the one who did not belong. And now I know that I was right," he said. "I did not belong. I have never belonged anywhere. I have titles and lands and more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and none of it has ever made me feel the way I feel when I am standing beside you on a cold hillside." Elowen looked at him for a long time. The wind moved between them, carrying the scent of wet grass and far-off sheep. "You broke your engagement," she said. "That will cause a scandal. The Tun will not forgive you." "I do not care what the Tun forgives." "You say that now, but you will return to London, and the whispers will follow you. They will call you a fool for casting aside Lady Marguerite. They will say you were bewitched by a stable hand." "Let them say it," he said. "I have been called worse by better people." She shook her head. "You do not understand. I will not be your rebellion. I will not be the common woman you used to shock your peers. I have seen men like you before, men who want to taste the wild before they return to their gilded cages." "I am not asking you to be my rebellion," he said. "I am asking you to stay." "Stay where?" "At Crowthorne Hall, in the servants' quarters, as your stable master." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I have not thought that far." "I know," she said, and her voice was not unkind. "You have not thought at all, you have only felt, and feeling is not enough." She turned and began to walk again, higher into the fell. The wild ponies would be grazing near the tarn, she knew. They would welcome her. They would ask nothing of her. But the Duke did not stop. He followed her, his boots slipping on the wet grass, his breath coming hard. "Then tell me what is enough," he said. "Tell me what I must do." Elowen stopped. They were high on the fell now, the lights of Crowthorne Hall small and distant below. The tarn lay before them, black as ink, rimmed with silver. The wild ponies stood at its edge, their heads raised, watching. "You must learn to be a man who does not need to own everything he loves," she said. "And I do not know if you can learn that." She walked down to the tarn's edge. The ponies did not move. They watched her come, their eyes soft in the moonlight. She reached out and touched the neck of the old matriarch, a black mare with a white star on her forehead. The Duke stood at a distance, watching. He did not try to touch the ponies. He did not try to speak. He only stood there, a man alone on a wide fell, learning what it meant to be outmatched. After a long time, he said, "I am going to London. I will settle my affairs. I will face the scandal. And when I return, I will not ask you to stay at the hall. I will not ask you to be anything other than what you are." Eloin looked at him across the dark water. "And what is that?" "The only person I have ever met who tells me the truth," he said, "and the only person I have ever wanted to deserve." He turned and walked back down the fell. The wild ponies watched him go, their breath misting in the cold air. Eloin stood beside the tarn until the sound of his footsteps faded. Then she sat down in the grass and wrapped her arms around her knees. The tears came then, not a storm but a slow, quiet release, like rain after a long drought. She did not know if she would ever see him again. She did not know if she wanted to. But she knew that he had followed her onto the fell, and that he had not tried to own her. And that was more than any man had ever offered her before. Part 6. The weeks that followed were quiet, and the quiet was a kind of healing. Eloin returned to her father's cottage, to the smell of peat smoke and the sound of wind in the chimney. She worked from dawn to dusk, mending walls, tending the fell ponies, helping with the autumn gathering. The Arabian remained at Crowthorne Hall under the care of the steward, but she did not go back. News came in fragments, carried by drovers and peddlers. The Duke had gone to London. The engagement was formally broken. Lady Marguerite had retired to her family's estate in Kent. Sir Hugh Bedlington had been seen in Harrogate, drinking heavily and telling anyone who would listen that the Duke had been bewitched by a gypsy horsewoman. Eloin did not care, or she told herself she did not care. But some nights when the wind howled down the valley, she would wake and think of him standing on the fell, his face moonlit and honest, saying he wanted to deserve her. She did not know what that meant. She only knew that the missing of him was a weight in her chest that would not shift. Then one gray morning, the Duke returned. He came alone, on horseback, not in a carriage. He rode up to the cottage on a sturdy fell pony, not the Arabian but a rough-coated black mare with a white star. He looked different, thinner. His boots were scuffed, his coat was plain wool, and he wore no cravat. Eloin's father answered the door. Tam Hale looked the Duke up and down, then turned to his daughter. "There's a man here," he said. "Says he's come to learn the droving trade." Eloin stepped outside. The Duke sat his pony, looking uncertain for the first time in his life. "I told you I would not ask you to be anything other than what you are," he said. "So I have come to learn what you are, if you will teach me." She stared at him. "You are a duke." "I am a man who has never done an honest day's work in his life, and I have been told the droving trade is honest work." Tam Hale snorted. "It is hard work, harder than anything in your soft London palaces." "I know," the Duke said. "That is why I am here." Eloin looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to her father. "I will take him up to the high pasture. If he falls off, he can walk back." She did not smile, but there was a flicker in her eyes and the Duke saw it. He followed her up the fell, riding behind her on the black mare. She did not speak. She only rode, and he rode after her, and the wind sang across the grass. For 3 weeks the Duke worked as a drover's apprentice. He learned to mend drystone walls, to cut peat, to find lost lambs in the mist. He learned to sit a horse for hours on end, through rain and wind and cold. He learned to go hungry and wet and tired, and to keep going anyway. The men of the valley watched him with suspicion at first, but he did not complain. He did not order. He only worked, and slowly the suspicion turned to something like respect. Eloin watched him too. She saw the blisters on his hands, the sunburn on his neck, the way he learned to move with the rhythm of the land instead of against it. She saw the pride drain out of him, replaced by something quieter and stronger. One evening they sat together on a stone wall, watching the sun sink behind the fells. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, shot through with gold. "Why did you come back?" she asked. "Because I could not stay away." "That is not an answer." He looked at her. His face was weather-worn, his eyes clear. "I came back because I have spent my whole life being told what a duke is. I have never once been told what a man is, and I thought you might know." Eloin smiled, a small, real smile. A man is someone who keeps his word, who mends what he breaks, who does not ask another to carry what he can carry himself. The Duke nodded slowly. "Then I have a great deal to learn." "You have learned a great deal already," she said. He reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough now, hardened by work. She did not pull away. "I sold my London house," he said. "The proceeds will go to a trust for the Fell ponies and the drovers' families. The land on the High Fell will be protected. No one will ever be able to buy it or close it off." Eloin stared at him. "You sold your London house." "I do not need a London house. I need only the things that matter, and the things that matter are here." He turned to face her fully. The last light of the sun caught his hair, turning it to bronze. "I love you, Eloin Hale. I have loved you since you stood in that stable yard and told me I was wrong. I will not ask you to be a duchess. I will not ask you to live in a house you do not want. I will only ask you to let me stand beside you if you will have me." The wind moved between them, soft and cool. The Fell ponies grazed below, their coats dark against the fading light. The Arabian, the prize mare who had started it all, stood apart from them, watching, her head high. Eloin looked at the Duke. He was not the man she had met that first evening, sharp and cold and full of his own consequence. He was something else now, a man who had walked into the wild and learned to be still. "I will have you," she said, "but not as a duke, as a drover, as a man who keeps his word." He lifted her hand and pressed it to his lips. His mouth was warm against her cold skin. "I will keep it," he said. "I will keep every word." They were married in the stone church in the valley, with no guests but the Fell ponies grazing outside and the whole village spilling out to watch. Eloin wore a dress of dark green wool, and he wore a plain coat of gray tweed. The vicar's voice was carried by the wind, and the bells rang out across the fell. But before the wedding, there was one more test. Sir Hugh Bedlington, ruined and bitter, had returned to the district. He had been seen in Kendal, drinking and talking of revenge. Eloin's father warned them both. The Duke said nothing, but he began to sleep in the stable loft, a loaded pistol by his side. On the night before the wedding, the stable block at Crowthorne Hall caught fire. The flames rose high against the black sky, and the smoke could be seen for miles. The Duke was there. He had gone to check on the Arabian. He found the fire already spreading, the hay bales blazing, the horses screaming. He did not hesitate. He ran into the burning stable. Eloin arrived on bracken, her hair wild, her face white. She saw the fire, saw the flames, saw the smoke. And then she saw him, staggering out of the burning doorway, his coat on fire, the Arabian plunging behind him. He was coughing, choking, his face blackened. But he was alive. The other horses followed, driven out by the heat. Only one remained, the old black mare with the white star, the matriarch of the wild herd. She had been trapped in the far stall. Eloin dismounted and ran toward the stable. The Duke caught her arm. "You cannot go in there," he shouted over the roar of the flames. "She is not mine to leave," Eloin said. "Let me go." He looked into her eyes, then he let go of her arm. "I am coming with you," he said. They went into the fire together. Part 7. The heat was a living thing, a wall of sound and light that pressed against them. Eloin had never known anything like it. The air burned in her throat and the smoke made tears stream down her face. But she did not stop. The old mare was in the furthest stall, kicking at the door, her eyes white with terror. The Duke grabbed an axe from the wall. He swung at the door once, twice. The wood splintered. The mare crashed through, nearly trampling them both. Eloin caught her halter, spoke to her in the old tongue, and the mare stilled just enough for them to lead her out. They staggered into the yard as the roof collapsed behind them. The sound was enormous, a groan of timber and a roar of fire, and then a great shower of sparks that rose into the night like dying stars. The villagers had gathered, forming a bucket line. The fire was dying now, starved of fuel. The stone walls of the stable block still stood, blackened and cracked, but the hall itself was untouched. Aloan stood in the yard, her chest heaving. The old mare's head pressed against her shoulder. The Duke stood beside her, his arm around her waist, his face streaked with soot. "You are hurt," she said. He looked down at his arm. The sleeve of his coat was burned through and the skin beneath was red and raw, but he shook his head. "It is nothing." "It is not nothing." She turned to the villagers. "Fetch a physician now." The fire had been no accident. The next morning Sir Hugh Bedlington was found hiding in the woods, his hands stained with lamp oil. The magistrate came and Sir Hugh was taken away, his bluster gone, his face empty. He would be transported. The scandal would follow him to the colonies. But Aloan did not care about Sir Hugh. She cared about the Duke, about Ambrose, who sat in her father's cottage while she tended his burns, her hands steady, her eyes full of something she no longer tried to hide. "You went into the fire for a wild pony," she said. "I went into the fire because you were going in," he said, "and because I could not let you go alone." She wrapped his arm in clean linen, her touch gentle. "You are a fool." "I am your fool," he said, "if you will have me." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. "I will have you," she whispered. "I will always have you." They were married on a bright morning in early autumn, when the fells were gold and the air was sharp as cider. The village turned out in force, and the fell ponies stood on the hillside above the church, watching with their calm dark eyes. Aloan wore green, not silk, but good wool, with a sprig of white heather in her hair. Ambrose wore a coat of gray tweed, and his hands were steady as he took hers. The vicar spoke the words, the bells rang, and when it was done, Ambrose turned to Aloan and said, "You have brought me home." She smiled, and the wind caught her hair, and the wild ponies on the hill threw up their heads and galloped across the fell in a great wave of muscle and mane. The Arabian, the prize mare, ran with them. In the years that followed, the fell ponies flourished. The land was protected, and the drover's way of life was preserved. Ambrose never returned to London. He became a farmer and a husband, and in time, a father. He learned to birth lambs and shear sheep and ride the high passes in winter. He learned to love the land not as an owner but as a steward. And Aloan, the drover's daughter who had brought a duke's prize mare home, rode the fells as she always had, free as the wind with her husband at her side. They never owned the wild ponies. No one could. But the ponies knew them and trusted them, and in the end, that was enough. The Duke's prize mare had run off with wild fell ponies, and the drover's daughter had brought her home. But in the end, she had brought the Duke home too. And home, it turned out, was not a place. It was a person. And the fell wind sang over the high ground, carrying the sound of hooves and laughter, and the long, sweet promise of a life earned together.